Uh, Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ko Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol. So, we're going to continue talking about men and women, and we were talking about, specifically the controversial, we ended up talking about some apparently controversial statements by Srila Prabhupada regarding women's position. And, of course, ultimately there is no controversy. Krishna Govinda, yeah. So ultimately there is no controversy, but the controversy is apparent. So we were discussing this yesterday, and this morning I came across something written by a scholar, devotee scholar, and I thought I would read it to you. Just disentangling myself from the wires. I thought I would read it to you. It's quite interesting. It sheds some light on the topic. I am very entangled in wires here. So, this is the disciple of Prabhupada who later became a scholar. This is what he says. There are few traditional societies in which women have played a dominant historical role. In this respect, Gaudiya Vaishnavism is no different. The egalitarianism of bhakti movements, which stress the universality of devotion and deny any disqualifications based on birth, sex, or caste, seems to have had limited real effects on the actual social circumstances of any of these classes of people. Well, at least up to the time that Prabhupada came, that could be said to be true. But Prabhupada changed that to some degree. But the point he's making is that in the Bhakti movement, we don't deny people based on race, creed, color, as was done previously, as the Brahmins denied people who weren't Brahminical access to higher levels of spirituality. And so he's saying that changed in the Bhakti movement, but it didn't exactly become equal socially. It became equal spiritually. Prabhupada made it more equal socially, but traditionally it has not been equal socially. So that's one point he's making. There are some, including the eminent Bengali historian Ramakanta Chakravarti, who feel that the status of women was improved in Chaitanya Vaishnavism, mainly due to the singular example of Janavi Devi. Indeed, it does appear that literacy rates among women and men in Vaishnav castes in Bengal were somewhat higher than in other comparable groups. Today, some women may be found playing the role of guru, especially ministering to other women. And there are some Chaitanya Vaishnav women who sing Padavali Kirtan, or give discourses on Vaishnava texts. On the whole, however, despite their dominant numbers at most religious events, the role of women continues to be a supporting one and subordinate to that of men. So, anyway, we discussed this previously, but generally, historically, women were always in a supporting role. And in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, you have some women saints, women gurus, more opportunity, especially now that Prabhupada came, for women. But Prabhupada did still stress simultaneously traditional roles, at least in the home, but then he also gave facility to women to preach. So we're going to continue reading from Vishaka Devi's article, and we had just finished reading about Prabhupada saying every woman should get married, and then saying that a devotee woman, if she wants to remain single, she can. And then we have this example of Prabhupada apparently saying something contradictory, but in fact, he's just applying according to place and circumstance. So we'll continue reading. One of the beauties of Krishna consciousness is that it sees past all bodily and mental differences to a higher spiritual truth. When we become devotees, we transcend all designations. Whoa. Hold on. Oh yes, this reminds me that my computer was playing. But this reminds me, this morning I was watching a video, and this devotee compiled statements from the Vishnu Purana, which predicts the future, and the 12th canto of Bhagavatam that predicts the future. And one of the aspects that is predicted of Kali Yuga is that women will become like men. So that's interesting. The reasons they become that way, it didn't say. As we've discussed, it may be a reaction to men mistreating them, or it may be a natural progression of Kali Yuga, that women will become more man-like, male-like, which men don't really appreciate that much. But I thought that was an interesting side note. When we become devotees, we transcend all designations. Thus, Krishna consciousness can unite all people, whatever their religion, race, nationality, age, or gender. The Hare Krishna movement is meant to be at the forefront of implementing such equal vision. Our world is in desperate need of it. Let's move on to what many consider a very heavy statement. Well, it's true that you have two levels. You have hierarchy and you have equality. And so there are, obviously on the material level there are differences, so we can't deny those differences on the material level. But we can't deny the fact that spiritually we're meant to be equal. And I think one of the things that is very important about that statement, let me move this into the center for all of those who like things centered. Yeah, there we go. It's that Prabhupada gave equal opportunity for service according to one's ability. And only if it was socially inappropriate would he restrict either men or women. Okay, so now we're going to move on to what many consider a very heavy statement. Never place your faith in a woman or politician. Chanakya Pandit, quoted by Srila Prabhupada. Jamuna Devi Dasi comments, I was present on 4 occasions when Srila Prabhupada repeated the Chanakya adage, never trust a woman or a politician. On each occasion, Srila Prabhupada looked at me in the eye to see my response. On the last occasion in Bombay in 1973, he quoted the saying, heartily laughing in front of a small group of men. Then he said, what do you think, Jamuna? Immediately I retorted, of course it's true, Srila Prabhupada. Whereupon he became grave, looked at me with great feeling and said, but you're not a woman, you are a Vaishnava. So, we had discussed that a bit. You're not a woman, you're a Vaishnava. Sounds like a lyric for a song. So we have these two things going on. We discussed this yesterday. Generalizations about male and female, which certainly can be made, but obviously there are exceptions. On the material level, there are exceptions. No, not all women are exactly the way all women are. Not all men are exactly the way all men are. And then you have these statements by Srila Prabhupada, which discounts a lot of the male or female tendencies that are found amongst people in general to exist within devotees who are sincerely serving. So this is a case. And that should we say we can't trust a woman or a politician? Well, what Chanakya means is you can't trust anyone who's not trustworthy, and those who are not, and there are a lot of people who are not trustworthy, but obviously you can't trust an untrustworthy person. But what he means is you can't trust someone who can't control themselves, because they may promise to do something, but because they're not controlled, they may not be able to follow through. That's what he means. So then another generalization, politicians are not trustworthy because they'll say whatever they need to say to get votes and stay in office. And a woman's not trustworthy, this is a generalization, because she'll say whatever she needs to say to get what she wants. That's what Chanakya Pandit means. So here Prabhupada's saying, he's not denying that, but he's saying, but you're not a woman, you're not this woman that Chanakya Pandit is talking about, you're a devotee, so you're different. At the same time, as we said, you could say not all women are like the women that Chanakya Pandit is speaking about. So that's the way we understand these things. And oftentimes people may say, what do you think of this race or this gender? And I will always answer, which person you're talking about, because we can't generalize. And we tend to generalize also if we don't know any people in that race. But when you get to know people in that race, you would stop generalizing because you have specific examples. We have seen many women very advanced in our movement, and Prabhupada has said many times, or several times, that when we speak about woman as being attachment and entanglement, Prabhupada said, not the devotee women, they're different. By their association, you go back to Godhead. Now, another thing also which is interesting and important is that our acharyas, when they talk about the entanglement or the cause of bondage that is caused by women, they're talking about it in relationship to men who are not controlled. They're not saying it's the woman's fault. Of course, it's the woman's fault if she's trying to allure a man away from Krishna. But they're speaking of it in general, that the female form is attractive for the man. It's a cause of bondage for the man, but cause of bondage for which man? The man who's not controlled. That's the point. It's a cause of bondage for the uncontrolled man. So our acharyas, when they talk about this bondage between male and female, they're never blaming it on the woman. Sometimes we blame the woman for having a female form which is attractive, but that's not the way the acharyas explain it. They explain it in terms of a weak man. So it's the man's fault. It's not the woman's fault. It's the man's fault if he becomes attracted to that form. So that's another important point, because in the immature days of ISKCON, so much was blamed on the women. Well, it's your fault that you have this form, and this form is alluring to men. But it's only alluring to men who want to be allured or who are weak. So whenever this conversation came up with Srila Prabhupada, and when devotees would say, but Prabhupada, can the women chant in another room? Or once a Swami from another tradition said, in our tradition we don't see women. We're not. And Prabhupada said, how can you not see women? Women are everywhere. So Prabhupada was laughing, thinking this is artificial. And Prabhupada's solution always was not to push the women away, but to be sense-controlled. And he said that if you don't want to see women, you have to live in the forest or on top of a mountain. So that was a joke. In other words, women exist, so it's the responsibility of the man to be controlled, and it's not that women are to be blamed for being attractive to men. That's Prabhupada's point. It's the man's weakness. If a man ever blames a woman for his own weakness, then he's not being honest with himself. All right, yes, a beautiful woman may trigger that weakness, but it can only trigger a weakness that exists. Yes, of course, socially, men should be separate, shouldn't be intimate with women because men are weak. That's true. But that's part of the point that Prabhupada's making. Women are everywhere, you have to learn how to deal with them appropriately, soberly. So the last sentence, to Jamuna, Prabhupada said, but you are not a woman, you are a Vaishnava. In other words, discounting this point that you can't trust a woman. We understand the context. You can't trust anyone who is self-interested because they'll cheat you for their own self-interest. Women, okay, here's another statement. Women, Shudras, and Vaishnavas are ordinarily regarded as less intelligent, but if one takes to Krishna consciousness, one is the most intelligent. This is from a lecture. Although Kunti had the body of a woman, she was a devotee. Therefore, she was not like an ordinary, unintelligent woman. Rather, she was the most intelligent, for she recognized Krishna to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, I think in this reading, we could say, let's excuse me for attacking you closely. I'm just trying to bring this down a little bit. Let's read this statement, and I will replace man with the word woman and see if this applies. Men, Shudras, and Vaishyas are ordinarily, or we'll just forget women. Shudras and Vaishyas are ordinarily regarded as less intelligent. But if one takes to Krishna consciousness, one is the most intelligent. Although Krishna Das was in the body of a man, he was a devotee. Therefore, he was not like an ordinary unintelligent man. Rather, he was the most intelligent, for he recognized Krishna to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So why would I read it that way? Why would I read something that Prabhupada said and change it? Only because if one is not a devotee, he's not considered intelligent. He's considered unintelligent. If one can't control himself, he's considered unintelligent. So you can apply that to men as well. Of course, this was a specific example. Prabhupada, again, referring to Chanakya and Manusamhita, that women are less intelligent, which we described yesterday, which means more prone to the bodily concept, more prone to sense gratification. Which is true. They are more domesticated in that sense. So, more prone to be selfish. At the same time, more prone to be less selfish. This is a contradiction because you see how women serve. They have both qualities. And we've discussed this before. In Kali Yuga, you see like contradictory qualities within the same person. Because if you look at the nature of woman, she's always serving and sacrificing. At the same time, she's always thinking about making herself beautiful and having nice things. So they serve more than men, and they want nice things more than men. So, it's unfortunate, I think, that women get a bad rap, because you can give the bad rap to men as well. Men have so many defects, so in many ways greater defects than women. And so I think we need to recognize that, and it's unfair if we just point the finger at women, especially in our movement, because when we do that, point the finger at women, it sounds like we're pointing the finger at devotee women, but that's never what's indicated here. And if we're going to point the finger at women, we should point the finger at men, because men have their own set of defects, default defects in Kali Yuga, many of which are the same as women. So I think we need to take these things into consideration, especially in dealing with women, and especially when we're preaching. Otherwise, we may say things that really make no sense to anybody. So I have to be careful about that. No material qualification can satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Yet, he is satisfied, and our endeavors become successful simply by our developing devotional service to him. Thus, from Krishna's viewpoint, unless and until we're elevated to spiritual consciousness, we're conditioned and fallen. From that viewpoint, those of us who are spiritually inclined are more intelligent than those who aren't. And on the spiritual platform, everyone is equal. Krishna does not discriminate. So, this is a very good point. I had been making this point. Who's more intelligent? A devotee woman or an intelligent non-devotee man? Well, in general, we would say a devotee woman, a devotee child, and a devotee man is intelligent, more intelligent than other devotee men, women, and children. And women who become devotees are the most intelligent because they have surrendered to Krishna. And despite of their so-called womanly defects, they engage in devotional service. So this point, I think, is obvious, and this point is rarely mentioned in our movement, which is unfortunate. So the next section is called classifications. Srila Prabhupada was not a warm, fuzzy guru who offered alluring cliches about the light, the force, or energy. Neither is Krishna such a god. Rather, Krishna and his devotees use strong words to classify materialists. Quote, men who are like dogs, hogs, camels, and asses praise those men who never listen to the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, the deliverer from evils. That's from the Bhagavatam 2.3.19. It's a heavy statement. Classifying of groups of people serves as a way, and classifying groups of people serves as a way. We and others can, 1, understand our conditioned predicament, 2, start to transcend our conditioning through purification, and 3, get an indication of where we are on Krishna's all-encompassing material map, and how we can move forward to achieve our desired destination. So, the point that's being made is when classifications are being made, it's not to denigrate people, but it's to help us understand the classifications, help us understand where we are, and help us understand where we want to go. Now, due to our natures, which are sometimes demoniac, when we read these classifications, we may think, okay, I am in the top classification. That means I'm better than all others. What we need to understand, and if we haven't understood it, we need to understand it. It's very important that in becoming a devotee, we're trying to see everyone better than ourselves. We're trying to recognize that we are the lowest and most fallen. Now, then you might say, but according to these classifications as a devotee, I'm not the lowest and most fallen. So in one sense, we're making these classifications to understand differences between materialists and spiritualists, and impersonalists and jnanis and yogis and devotees and so forth. But at the same time, as a devotee, we're simultaneously meant to think that others are better than I am. So in looking at these classifications, if the result is that it makes us think we're better than everyone, then that's unfortunate. We've misunderstood it. These classifications are there to help us understand philosophy, to help us understand how we're conditioned, and how to transcend our conditioning. Everyone in the material world is somehow on Krishna's map, and every place on that map has, for the conditioned soul, assets and deficits. For example, the scriptures tell us that before we can transcend the modes of material nature, we must first come to the mode of goodness. To be in the mode of goodness is advantageous, essential in fact. But those in that mode may be stuck in their materially comfortable, peaceful state, and thus uninterested in spiritual life, and unable to free themselves from repeated birth and death. A grim downside to the mode of goodness. So that's a good point. Even the good can become bad, and the bad can become good. Right? According to Sri Krishna's and Srila Prabhupada's teaching, everyone, regardless of his or her material designation, has the potential to attain the highest spiritual position, namely, to become a pure devotee. Pure Vaishnavas are beyond all designations and classifications. And in their purest state, they see everyone else as beyond all designations and classifications too. The association of such persons is uplifting. As Srila Prabhupada said about his female disciples, these women are not ordinary women. They are preachers, they are Vaishnavas. By their association, one becomes a Vaishnava. Now, what I think is interesting, especially if you're a younger devotee and thinking of doing a master's or a PhD, there's a lot of social situations in ISKCON that I find interesting. But I think this is one of them. You look at things Prabhupada has said about women, about us being equal on the spiritual level, about Vaishnavis being respected, equal to their brothers, and so forth. And then you look how that plays out when it gets filtered through the male mind, with the male's conditioning and his motives and his perhaps misunderstanding of the philosophy, or perhaps is his attempt to better understand it, and does it reflect what Prabhupada did with his female disciples, how he treated them, how he spoke about them. And I think in many cases you will see it doesn't, which is interesting and something that we should be aware of, even for women, because in some cases in the history of our movement, even women disrespected women because they were hearing things in class that were demeaning to women, and then women were demeaning other women. You'll have to excuse me, I have allergic reaction. So, if you want to sympathize with me, it feels like there's ants crawling in my nose. That's what allergy feels like. So, one of the things that I've spoken extensively on is alignment, how we be aligned with what we are taught, with the values of Krishna consciousness, the teachings and the practices, and a lot of times we're not aligned. We have a philosophy, but then it plays out different in our lives, and it plays out different socially, within our organization, within our temples, within our interactions. Of course, we see this all the time. We're not perfect. But becoming aware of it, and considering how we can model what Prabhupada taught and the example that he gave us in all areas of our lives, personally and in all areas of social interaction. That's the goal. And so it would be interesting for someone to do a sociological study about ISKCON to see where we're off in terms of what Prabhupada taught, what examples he set, and how that is played out in the lives of your average devotee and the lives of your average temple. Any young kids here want to major in social psychology, then you can do your thesis on this. Because I think it would be valuable for the movement to understand, because this is the challenge we have. You know, we often think we're following without evaluating the culture that we've created. And that's something we need to do. We could say, okay, we think we're following, but let's look at the culture. Does the culture exemplify what the examples that Prabhupada set and what Prabhupada taught? And I would think if we were honest, we would see in some cases, no. And I think here, on this topic, what we're talking about, how ISKCON has dealt with women, we would see in certain cases, or some may argue in many cases, a much different attitude towards women than Prabhupada had, or Prabhupada and different attitude than Prabhupada wanted us to have. And if that were not the case, there would be no need for a Vaishnavi ministry. And part of the reason there's a need for a Vaishnavi ministry, which I think is obvious, is that we have a movement that is controlled by men. So I think any movement that's controlled by men that doesn't have female representatives, there's a chance, or it's likely, that the females will not be properly respected, or what's the word I'm looking for? Properly taken care of, or their needs properly addressed. Here is a lecture from Srila Prabhupada at a wedding. Our mission is to see Sarva Sukhino Bhavantu. Everyone become happy. We don't want to see that we exploit somebody else and I become happy. We want to see everyone happy. But they do not know how to be happy. Therefore, we are trying to spread Krishna consciousness movement so that everyone will be happy. Krishna consciousness means facilitating all devotees so that they remain enthusiastic and determined to grow to their full potential. Srila Prabhupada offered us such facility, and we, his followers, are meant to offer the same facility to others. So she mentions a video called Srila Prabhupada's Shower of Mercy. You may want to note that down. Srila Prabhupada's Shower of Mercy. I think that's a video where women, disciples of Prabhupada, explain how Prabhupada took care of them, how he dealt with them. We read that yesterday. Some of the ways that the female disciples describe Prabhupada caring for them like a father would care for a daughter. But the men in our movement, especially in the early days, really did not care for women like daughters. Of course, they were the same age, so it would have been awkward. But even like brothers, not as much as required. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur wanted to re-establish Daivi Varnashram. In Daivi Varnashram, there cannot be acknowledgement of social status according to birthright. Because in the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that determining considerations are guna and karma, qualities and work. It is this Daivi Varnashram that should be established all over the world to continue a perfect society for Krishna consciousness. This may be astonishing to foolish critics, but it is one of the functions of a Krishna conscious society. So, as you know, Mahaprabhu did not discriminate based on caste, creed, color, and so forth. And so that's the legacy. And so we speak about legacy, we have to speak about culture. So we leave our legacy in one way through the culture that we leave within the organization that we're working in, or particularly within the area that you're working, the temple or the project. The legacy is the culture. How are people treated? That's part of the culture, and that's part of the legacy. So, just as a little bit of historical phenomena or social phenomena, that there's a very strong tendency in human psychology to repeat the behavior of previous generations without questioning why that behavior should be repeated. And often that behavior is not healthy, or perhaps it was healthy or it worked 20 years ago, but it doesn't work now because society is different, people think different, social norms have changed. And so there's a tendency when asked, why are we doing something, specifically something that doesn't work, and something that we could change without it being considered heretical, is that, well, this is the way it's always been done. And so that means is that because it's the way that it's always been done, there's an assumption that that's the right way, and that's the way it should always be done. Now, sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's not true. Sometimes it's been done that way just because that's how it's been done. It wasn't thought out. It was just done that way because that's how those people in that culture did it. And it may have not even worked well in that culture. But there's this assumption because they did it and it wasn't changed, nobody changed it, then we should continue to do it, which is not necessarily true in every situation. So now, whatever temple you're in, whatever organization, project you're working on, whatever that culture is, the people coming into that will tend to think that's the standard. If that culture is misogynistic, or if that culture deals with people unfairly, if that culture is dominated by a male vision and women don't get opportunities for service that they should have, etc., generally that is going to continue. Now, of course, some people may fight it and say this is wrong because today in society there's lots and lots of issues coming up about inequality on all levels, not just gender, racial, financial, and so forth. But the point remains is that we, if you're working on any project or in any temple, we should think whatever we're doing now is likely to continue as a culture into the future, and we just ask ourselves, is this the culture we want, especially in relationship to gender? Is this how we want it? I'm not saying the way your project is running is not the way you want it, but I'm suggesting that perhaps it isn't, or at least you could examine if it is. Does that make sense? So legacy is very important, because a lot of you who are listening to this see discrepancies. I know that for a fact because you've told me this. And a lot of you who see discrepancies are not leaders or don't have influential positions, and so you don't really know how to deal with it. And I would just say, bring it up to authorities and say, I see a discrepancy here. This is what Prabhupada said, but on the ground here, this is what's going on, and I think it's important that we address this issue for ourselves and for future generations, because we don't want to perpetuate this misunderstanding or problem, whatever it is. So I think that's important. I don't think anyone should be afraid if you can present it humbly and genuinely, or present it submissively. I think I'm seeing something here that is hypocritical. What do you think? Devotees are saying this, or devotees are doing this. Is this wrong? Should we allow this? So you're not challenging the authorities, but you can present to the authorities your understanding and ask, is this correct? And if it is correct, what can we do about it? So there are good ways and bad ways to disagree, and there are good ways and bad ways to try to make changes. But there is the concept of the sin of omission, that if you see something which is not right or not just, if you see devotees are being mistreated or not given equal opportunities for service or for aspects of Krishna consciousness that they deserve, then you can say something. You should say something, because we don't want to perpetuate that culture. And that culture is, it happens subconsciously, naturally, because of our conditioning. You agree? You've seen that? It's not, a lot of times it's not like anyone is bad or anyone's consciously manipulating the culture. It's just things kind of evolved in a certain way of their own accord, but it wasn't malicious, but the way it evolved is not the way we ideally want it to be. And therefore, if we see discrepancies, then we should bring it up, or just ask a question, why is it like this? If Srila Prabhupada says this, if Srila Prabhupada did this, if in other zones they do this, why are we doing this here? What's the reason? I don't think this is good. I don't think it's helpful for devotees. We can be watchdogs, so to speak. We accept service in society not according to our birth, but according to our qualities and the nature of our activities. If this straightforward, simple principle is enacted, it could help solve the current international crisis of racism and sexism. Yeah, because racism and sexism simply means you're stereotyping a race of people or a gender and putting everyone in that stereotype rather than dealing with individuals according to who they are, their abilities, their nature, and so on. So our philosophy says deal with people according to their nature, engage them according to their nature. Sometimes there's a stereotype. Shudras are like this, and this class of people is Shudra. But in our movement, everyone has the opportunity to be a Brahmin. And not everyone has the nature of a Shudra. Some have Vaishya and Kshatriya and Brahminical nature, be they man or woman. So Prabhupada never discouraged women from giving class, never discouraged women from preaching, and so forth. So he allowed them to engage in Brahminical duties if they were inclined. In fact, I just read a story this morning that one devotee named Jyotirmayi, she's a French devotee from early days of the movement, she had learned a little bit of Sanskrit from one of Prabhupada's Sanskrit scholars. And she was able to pronounce Sanskrit very well. And so when they were reciting Sanskrit in the Bhagavatam class, Prabhupada noticed how well she pronounced it, and he said, okay, every day you will lead the Sanskrit. And then we read the other day, yesterday we read that Prabhupada was saying that Nandarani, the wife of Dayananda, was more intelligent than Dayananda, and Dayananda is very intelligent. And in other letters, Prabhupada said, women are not barred from giving class, from doing brahminical activities. So what's being said here is there's this tendency to put all people of a certain gender or race, ethnic group, and so on, in a homogeneous, let's rephrase that, stereotype, that's what I wanted to say. Stereotype people of a gender or race and so forth. And say that they're all like that. And so Krishna consciousness is not about that. Prabhupada never did that. And although some generalizations are made, we should always remember that we're dealing with individuals and everyone is not the same. And we may also misunderstand those stereotypes as we have often misunderstood the statement, women are less intelligent. It doesn't mean they're less capable. There's a lot of women that are more intelligent than a lot of men. The men who are listening to this, you should know, if you don't know, there's a lot of women who are more capable of you in many areas of life. So we have, and there's a lot of women who are less capable than you, and vice versa. There's a lot of men who are more capable of women, more women capable of men. Well, that's not vice versa, it's just the same thing. So, stereotyping people, races, ethnic groups, genders, is not Krishna conscious and not something that Prabhupada did. Now, at the same time, someone may argue, but you have to stereotype to some degree, and that's true. For social, you can't just say, well, we don't want to stereotype men and women, so just have neutral bathrooms. And just let men and women mingle freely. Of course, we understand we have to make distinction. We understand clearly that sexual control is vital to our spiritual life. So, but we don't want to stereotype people in such a way that we limit their service or we minimize them unnecessarily. That's the point. We accept service in society not according to our birth, but according to our qualities and nature and the nature of our activities. Yeah, so we read that. So she's saying this would help solve the problems, the current problems of racism and sexism, and just deal with people as they are. And it's often said that if you have some prejudice or racism within you, it's often because you don't really know anybody in that race. Often you'll say, well, I don't like this kind of person. And then you'll be asked, well, do you personally have any friends? And they'll always say no, because if they had friends from that race that they don't like, they wouldn't say they don't like that race. Because you'll see, we're all the same. Customs, culture is slightly different, but we're all basically the same, and you can have friends from any culture and any race. For women, however, there are nuances to this principle of serving according to one's qualities and activities. So here's a conversation. Could a woman become a temple president? Prabhupada, yes, why not? Glad to hear it. But because women are less intelligent, they should remain dependent on first-class father, first-class husband, first-class son. Then she is first class. That is the injunction. So less intelligent means prone to be overcome by passion and protected by father and son or husband. The assumption is that those men are in the mode of goodness. Big assumptions there. Assumption that all women are in passion, all men are in goodness. Obviously not, but that in more traditional cultures and times in the past, that was true. And men physically as protectors, of course, that's true, always and still today. So that's what Prabhupada means. Women should remain dependent in childhood upon first-class father, in youthhood upon first-class husband, and in old age upon first-class son. Woman is never independent. If she becomes independent, her life is not very good. She must agree to remain dependent on first-class father, first-class husband, and first-class son. 3 stages. This is so interesting because everything I say, then when I read, Vishaka is saying the same thing, which is, I think, a symptom of being trained by Prabhupada, that we would say the same thing. So she says, a first-class man is a man of integrity, kindness, courage, spiritual commitment, and maturity. That women can be temple presidents but also remain dependent on such a man may appear to be a contradiction, but Srila Prabhupada doesn't see it that way. From what he says here, women should remain protected and do a service they're capable of. That women should be protected does not mean that women are forbidden from speaking, singing, managing, or leading. Very good point. Let's take a closer look at protection. So this is, I think this is really important, don't you? The statement that she just made, I want to read it again. This is really good. From what he says here, women should remain protected and do a service they're capable of. In other words, he's saying they should be protected, but he also said they could be temple president. So she's making the point. But Prabhupada didn't mean they can't be temple president because they have to be protected. And many people would say that. Well, it's not appropriate. But then Varnashram, women are in a subordinate role, they're not prominent, they shouldn't be in leadership positions. And it doesn't appear that Prabhupada is saying that. He said, yes, they can be temple presidents, but they should be protected. Protected from what? A big protection is from being exploited by men. We had discussed that, I think, in the first class. That men's nature is that if women allow them, they will exploit them. Now what we're seeing more and more is even if women won't allow them, they'll exploit them, or at least try to exploit them. And in Kali Yuga, women are allowing themselves to be exploited, which is another reason why they should be protected. But just recently, I got this spam of all these, what looks like to be girls who are prostitutes. They just look like college students. So I got these spam mails, I'm ready, call me. So, yeah, I'm ready, that's the problem. Women, if you're ready, the men are always ready. They're just waiting for you to be ready. And therefore, you women who are always ready, you need protection so that you're not always ready. We said yesterday that the more sexual relationships you have before marriage, the more likely you'll get divorced. The lowest divorce rate is among those who had no girlfriends, boyfriends before they were married, who weren't living together before they were married. So protection, all these girls who are working for some organization that is prostituting them, it's like they're being pimped online now. I didn't get into it. I didn't go through the details of the emails, but it sounded like that. Call me up, I can come to your house, I'll do anything you want. All right, and I got emails, and all the emails are from apparently different girls who all said the same thing, so it must obviously be one organization. The organization is now the pimp. So do these girls need protection? Yes, they need a father, a husband, who will protect them from prostituting themselves for money and degrading themselves. So that's another aspect of protection. So, I like this statement. That women should be protected does not mean that women are forbidden from speaking, singing, managing, or leading. Let's take a closer look at protection. So the next section is, what is protection? So I think this is very important because, oftentimes when we talk about women needing protection, it comes across as demeaning. Well, I will protect you because I'm better than you. Well, that's not exactly the way it's meant to look. I mean, a son doesn't think himself better than his mother, but he thinks himself in a position to protect her. He has certain attributes that she doesn't have that he can use to protect her. So I think that's important. And when this idea of protection gets in the mind of the conditioned soul, then this idea of, oh, I'm the protector, which means I'm in the dominant and enjoyer position, I can exploit and so forth. So let's read. What is protection? Protection, like everything in Krishna consciousness, is ultimately meant to help one advance spiritually. So this is a morning walk. Protection means what? Your protection idea is very limited. You want to be protected for a few years, but the protection of Krishna is perpetually. You are being protected. Taktvadeya punar janma naiti. You don't get any more material body. That is real protection. So she's making the point that ultimate protection is spiritual protection. That, like our guru is our protector, whether we're male or female, our guru is our protector. Anyone who can help us spiritually is our protector. So the man, father, the son is meant to be in that stronger sattvic, elevated position. If they're not in that position, how can they be a protector? Then, as we said yesterday, then the woman becomes a protector of the husband because he's weaker. So she's making the point that protection ultimately means spiritual protection, although of course we have material protection is necessary, but the ultimate protection is spiritual. As often Prabhupada said, who can protect you? You can have the best mother, the best doctor, all the money and so forth, but ultimately it's Krishna, so we understand that. There was a man in South Africa, he owned a whole floor of a hospital. He was very wealthy in the diamond or gold business. So Prabhupada would that was pointed out to Prabhupada. He said, yes, well, according to your karma, you can't save yourself. So even if you have a whole floor in a hospital, you can't save yourself. So, here in speaking about the traditional culture of India, Prabhupada explains what ultimate protection is. Ake Krishna Mareke, Mare Krishna Rakeke. That person whom Krishna wants to protect, no one can kill. And that person whom Krishna wants to kill, no one can protect. As Prabhupada said in a room conversation quoted above, what can the father, husband, or son do? Ultimately, Krishna is our protector. So here's a letter. Women must be protected, and it is the duty of the leaders of our society to see that this is carried out. And in the same way, it's the duties of the leaders of our society to protect the men, to protect the children, to provide for everyone. And this is something, of course, we need to do better. We have various levels in which we have to protect devotees, and some of our devotees are becoming older, they can't do service, they need to be taken care of. When devotees are sick, they need to be taken care of. We need to protect our children from the influence of the social environment they're growing up in. We need to protect our devotees by creating sangha, hearing and chanting, and so forth. So protection is not only for women. Women protected in specific ways, maybe unique ways, but we all need protection. Spiritually, for sure, and materially. We can't minimize women needing protection. The Me Too movement is evidence that sometimes some men are out of control and so unqualified that they force themselves on women. There was an incident when I was temple president, and one boy was acting inappropriately with women. He was helping in the kitchen where the women were cooking. He was supposed to help them. And he was acting inappropriately. I think he touched them occasionally. And so the women came to me, explained it, and I spoke to the woman. I spoke to the man. And then the man continued to do it. And the women came to me and they said that we don't feel that you're doing your job as a temple president because you're not protecting us from this man. So that's natural that women want to be protected from aggressive men, and they feel that it's the duty of the leaders to protect them. You will rarely find, I don't know if there's any incident in ISKCON where a man ever came to the temple present and said, I need to be protected from a woman. She's attacking me physically. I mean, maybe sometimes a man may feel the vibe, but the woman actually touching and coming on to the man is very rare. I've never seen it, or maybe only it's just a vibe. But as far as women are concerned, it's much more common. So yes, leaders need to protect women from men who may act inappropriately towards them. Definitely. Women need to be protected from such men, and the most effective way to do this is for women to serve in the association of Krishna's sincere devotees. When in such an environment, women fully use their talents and proclivities in Krishna's devotional service, their absorption is another form of protection. From a lecture, women should always be protected. Protection does not mean negligence. No, protection means to give him, Prabhupada means her, give her all facilities. That is protection. So that's an important point. All facilities, sometimes, unfortunately, I don't know if this goes on today, but in the early days of the movement, devotees would line up for prasadam and the women would always be last. So hopefully when they finally get there, there's prasadam left. So that's not proper. Or when we're giving out facilities, women come last in line. So Prabhupada, as we read yesterday, always made sure that women had facilities that they needed as women, which were often facilities that men could live without, but women needed. So he made sure that they were given facility, they were taken care of, and they were safe. Unfortunately, not all temples in ISKCON have always done that. And that's something to be aware of. And so next time there's a big line for prasadam, and you see all the men in front and all the women in the back, you might want to say something. Now, I understand a lot of places don't want to mix men and women, especially if there's a lot of brahmacharis, but if it's all grihastas, where it doesn't make so much sense. Or what some temples do is they have two lines, one for men, one for women. Something to be conscious of if in your area of jurisdiction women are not being facilitated as well as men, when they should be. Something to consider. I see this, not as much as it used to happen, but it does happen. So we have to be aware of that. Protection ultimately means that as far as possible, we remove the physical, mental, and emotional obstacles to another's spiritual progress, that we facilitate and encourage that person's devotional service in whatever form that service takes. Srila Prabhupada protected women by educating them about their true identities as spirit soul, engaging them in devotional service, a process by which they could attain liberation from death and rebirth, the ultimate protection. And when limited facilities were available for the devotees, giving them a due share of those physical resources. In India, for example, Prabhupada would ensure that his female disciples had proper transportation, prasad, and sleeping facilities. There's a story where Prabhupada went somewhere, and there were two rooms, one for him, and there was another room next to him, and he gave that to the women, and then all the men slept on the roof. Because he understood that women should not sleep on the roof, wouldn't be safe, they wouldn't want to, they wouldn't be comfortable. So that's what she's saying, that Prabhupada provided facilities. Now, women need different facilities than men. I was just in New Govardhan in Australia. Well, not just, I think it was April. In the women's ashram, every woman has a small room to herself because women need that. Men, it's a little easier to live together. But women need to live, it's easier for women to have their own room. That's their nature. So they provided that facility in recognition of their needs. Interesting. So that's, I like that. I thought that was very good, thoughtful. An immature man may feel threatened by a woman who has a voice, intelligence, ideas, or any other form of power. Yes, yes, yes. So this is interesting. Because sometimes a man may say, no, this is a woman's position, she shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. But when in actuality, it may be that he just feels his masculinity is being eroded if there's a strong woman. So it's not her fault, but it's his fault. And that does happen. And men, you're meant to recognize if this is happening to you, and if you're trying to minimize the service women can do, or in any way limit them, consider whether you're just an insecure man who's being threatened by a woman, which many men are, unfortunately. Such a man, in the name of protection, may actually commit violence if he discourages, denigrates, or prevents the woman's chosen devotional service. Protection is not about denying someone's service based on the body in which he or she has appeared. That would be repression or oppression and would cause only distress. Rather, protection means providing a safe place from which one's protege can perform her service. Exactly. Facilitation. So, of course, now that we're reading this, someone can say, well, this sounds like she's promoting female gurus. And she's not stating that directly, she's just stating a principle that if a woman is qualified to do a particular service, in the name of this, in the name of that, she shouldn't be restricted. And I know in the name of the proper social position for women, some men have said that women should not be gurus because we don't want to give women dominant positions, and other men have said that they can't, they wouldn't be able to do well in that position. And so she's just making a general principle. She's not talking about female gurus, and you could draw that conclusion, of course, because this would support female gurus. But I don't think we should read into that she's saying that to support female gurus. She's saying that to support facilitating women in any service that they're qualified to do, as long as it doesn't create any kind of social toxicity that's inappropriate within that social climate, and it would be disturbing to devotees. Of course, sometimes it's disturbing to devotees, but it shouldn't be. It's just that that social climate is not mature enough to facilitate women in this way, and it would cause disturbance. So we could say, well, if it causes disturbance, we shouldn't do it, and in some cases that's true. But if the case is that it's just an immature culture, a culture that needs to grow, and that's why we're not doing it, then we should change the culture rather than restrict the women. You agree? I know you agree, because if you didn't agree, you would have just changed the channel already. Often, capable women who want to offer service in the Hare Krishna movement are not encouraged to do so. The movement is a poor place for having lost out on the wealth of our abilities. Yeah, that's so. You have people who have abilities, and to deny them service means we're losing out on the wealth of their abilities, which is unfortunate. Okay, I'm going to stop here. I don't think anyone had any questions. I guess I just didn't stimulate you today. I don't know. Something's wrong with me. But, or else I didn't notice. So let me go back. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. I heard some people who are marketers say that what you can do is you can take lectures or blogs or whatever, and videos, and you can divide them up into like little 1-minute sections, and then put them out on your Instagram or Twitter or whatever. And if you take 1-minute sections from the same talk, you would get, I think, some repetition, because that's how we speak. We make a point, we look at it from different angles. And they said, no, you should repeat, because people don't get it the first time. So we're repeating some points. This is now think this is the 6th class, is it not? This is the 6th class on this topic, and so we're repeating some points. But we need to repeat them. They're important. Okay, so there's no question, so let's just sum it up. I think what's important here also is for women to be able to deal with this situation. The article is called "What's a Woman to Do" by Vishaka Devi Dasi, which you can just Google. So, the challenge for women, well, it's a challenge for all of us, but maybe more of a challenge for women, is when we see something that's unfair, unjust within our organization, unfair, unjust towards women. It's disturbing, for sure, and we want to make it better. So as women, you want to think, well, how can we make it better rather than becoming discouraged or angry? You want to think, well, how can we make this better? What can we do? And sometimes it may be necessary to talk to the men and say, you're the man, you have the power, it's your responsibility. And I think ultimately that's really where the problem lies. It's the man's responsibility to protect the women, to facilitate the women, to give them equal opportunity for service as far as possible, to engage them according to their abilities. And when that's not happening, to be aware of that and then facilitate it. So if you, as women, see that that's not happening, talk to the leaders in your area and explain that to them, rather than just become upset. Because I could see that by listening to this class, although I'm not upset and we're not saying anything I think that's upsetting, I could see how some women could be upset, saying, oh, yes, I didn't realize that the extent of these problems and how women are not being protected or discriminated against, and that's upsetting. Because maybe in your area that's not happening. So, if you're upset, be upset in sattva-gun. Do something about it. Don't be upset in passion and ignorance, because that'll degrade it. So, and also this message is to men, as I mentioned before. In your area, if you see women are not being treated well or not protected, say something. Now, of course, in some cultures, it doesn't matter what you say, it's just not part of their culture. But if there are women who are being prevented from doing services that they're qualified to do, it's really not what Krishna consciousness is about, and we really should have discussions about this. Okay, so we can end here, and then we will see you next week, same time. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.